Hi, здравствуйте, buongiorno. It's a real pleasure to meet you. My name is Simon and I'm the founder of RPT. Thank you for taking a few minutes to watch this video because it's a real pleasure for me to talk to you about some of the incredible breakthroughs and developments we've made over the last few years. In fact, I'm just about to launch a brand new technique which I believe is going to transform the whole world of therapy and personal development. So if you're a therapist already helping people, or perhaps you're into personal development, you want to know how to better clear your blocks and to move forward in life, pay attention in the next few minutes because I think this information will be very new and powerful for you. Now there are lots and lots of personal development techniques and therapy techniques already. I do something really different. So RPT draws together the best research from many different fields. Of course, it's based on psychology and science, but I was also very influenced by, in particular, bodywork, shamanic bodywork techniques, and I'll talk to you about that in a minute, as well as like tantric philosophy and spirituality and many other aspects and modalities. And all of this has come together through 15 years of research to create RPT. I think perhaps the most important aspect of RPT, what makes it completely different to everything else, has been the influence of shamanic bodywork, and in particular what's called de-armoring. And I'd love to tell you about that, because this is really completely different to anything else you might have done. Okay, so in traditional therapy, by which I mean everything else, a person comes to the therapist with a problem. So here's the person, talk about my problem, and the therapist listens and usually makes a really big mistake, which is the therapist asks them to talk more about their problem. So if it's abuse or trauma, the therapist is like, okay, tell me about your trauma. And the client, you should never do this, but the client talks even more about their trauma, getting stuck in the story of that trauma, re-traumatizing themselves. That's a traditional model of therapy, and it's completely wrong. Why is it wrong? Because you're dealing with the person only on this surface or superficial layer, and you're never really getting to what's underneath it. Now, I studied therapy, was a therapist for many years, not really realizing that I was doing it wrong, not really understanding the problem until I started studying bodywork technique, and in particular I got involved with shamanic bodywork. There's something really interesting which I understood through working with the body, which is understanding how the body holds trauma. So for example, if the person had some physical injury or accident in their life, the body has some compensation mechanism. For example, certain muscles might stop working, freeze up to protect the rest of the body. And so in order to help a person, what bodywork techniques do is that they access that point of the body where there's this compensation mechanism, what we call armor, or protective layer, and help the body to actually release that, usually by helping the body to feel how it's holding on to that in order to be safe, why that's a defensive or protective mechanism, and helping the body to release the armor. Again, the key understanding here is that the symptom of the body after that physical trauma is often not the symptom of the trauma itself, but the symptom of how the body is trying to keep itself safe. So for example, a person was in some car accident and they might have had some injury to some part of their body, and then the body goes into freezing to protect that. And the symptom, the freezing, could be somewhere different to the initial injury. So a really good body worker knows that, and before dealing with perhaps the initial injury or where the biggest problem is medically speaking, the first step is always to de-armor these compensation mechanisms. And so we have in bodywork a concept called physical de-armoring, removing the armor. And what that does is it makes the body more vulnerable, at least temporarily. Because you know the armor, I'm going to use a pillow here, the armor actually protects the body. The body doesn't want you to see what's vulnerable. So we have this armor, which is often the symptom, the initial symptom, but it's protecting the body. And when you remove that armor away, you get to what's more vulnerable. And that's the bit that really needs work. Now, interestingly, this is not new information. If some of you have studied bodywork techniques, including advanced forms of massage, you know all about this already. This is really well-established information. But no one's really figured out how to apply that into the emotional healing context before, for a number of reasons, which include limitations of therapists not being allowed to touch their clients. So generally speaking, a psychologist, a psychotherapist is not supposed to touch their client. There are ethical reasons for that. and that's created a lot of limitations around doing de-armoring. So on the whole, the way that healing has been over the last, let's say, 20 years, is that there's been two types of healing. There's like talking therapy and body work, physical therapy, which works and which doesn't work. We have these two types. Talking therapy doesn't really work for a simple reason. The person has armor and they're talking to the therapist from this place of armor. So what's happening when they're talking to the therapist is they're describing not their real problem, but they're describing their protective layers. Of course, therapists know that. Therapists aren't silly, they understand the problem, but it can take months or years of building trust with the client to get the client to release that protective layer to show their vulnerability. Okay, what is RPT and why is it different to everything else? Well, I develop methods, talking therapy methods, of very, very quickly de-armoring a client and getting them to the vulnerable position. So in other words, after studying bodywork techniques, and particularly shamanic bodywork, I worked out how to take that philosophy and apply it into a talking therapy context. This is completely new. It's never been done before. It's never worked before. I figured out how to do it and I want to show you that because it makes the whole concept of healing so much easier. Because again, what most therapists do is just keep the client stuck on the level of their problems, talking about their problems. In RPT, we can very quickly, sometimes in 5 minutes, rip all that construct away and understand what's the real issue. What does it look like in practice? Well, I'm going to use maybe an extreme example, but a realistic one. Let's say someone has come to you and they've had a really big trauma. Could be, for example, a sexual abuse in their childhood, or to use an example of a recent client, could be a miscarriage many years ago which she never got over. So what generally happens is the person goes to a therapist and they talk about their problem. Oh, I was abused. Oh, I had this miscarriage, and talk and talk and talk. And people will sometimes spend 10, even 20 years talking to a therapist and still be stuck in that trauma. They're not getting over the trauma, they're just talking about their trauma. RPT is completely different. What we do is we look at how that trauma has resulted in a protective layer, a compensation mechanism. For example, what can happen is the person starts to identify with that trauma. They feel safer holding on to that trauma than they would do if they were vulnerable and letting go of it. And so we get the person to identify with the trauma, often using a pillow as a prop, exactly like this. We get them to identify with their trauma, feel safe with the trauma, then rip it away. And we feel that underlying vulnerability. The interesting thing is that that underlying vulnerability is usually really unrelated, at least superficially, completely unrelated to the trauma or the symptom that they think they had. So they might come into you and say, this terrible thing happened to me when I was 20 years old. We have to talk about what happened when I was 20. But when you take away the armor, they go back to the state of being 2 years old, or maybe birth trauma, and that's the real vulnerability that we work on. So that's one of the interesting ways in which RPT is really different to everything else. We don't really work on the symptom, ever. Even if the symptom is trauma, that's never what we work on. The trauma happened for a reason, it's compensating for something deeper. All we do in RPT is we go back. What is it compensating for? What's the underlying issue here? What's really the kernel, or could say the inner wound, the core wound that needs to be healed? And when we heal that core wound, which is quite easy by the way, when you heal that core wound, all of the symptoms disappear. The reason why it's quite easy, I'd say there are two things. The actual healing part is really easy because one, we're working on the right thing. And two, we have techniques that make it incredibly easy to switch out of that trauma. So it's a combination of the right technique, but also working on the right thing. And that's RPT in a nutshell, especially RPT level 1. We show you how to get back to the core wound, to the right thing to work on, and we give you the right tools. And the right tool is switching off the survival instinct, switching off the body's compensation mechanism so the body can release the trauma. So our level 1 course, it's actually a 3-day course with an optional extra practice day. What we do on level 1 is we help people, we take people, whether they're therapists already or interested in personal development, we help people to make that jump from symptoms and talking about symptoms to de-armoring, to removing symptoms and feeling what's underneath it and being able to heal what's underneath it. So it takes approximately 1 day of the course is like de-armoring work, another day of the course is finding the original trauma part and being able to heal it, and then extra practice time. The technique is fairly simple. Most people get it very quickly within the first 2 days and then get that extra day of practice. It's simple because, you know, healing's meant to be simple. There are techniques out there that take years and years and years to master. Not RPT. When you do it right, when you're working on the right thing in the right way, it is simple. The key difference now, when you look at RPT and all the other techniques, the key difference is in the results. RPT is permanent, right? What do I mean by that? Well, with most other techniques, you can get a feel-good effect. You can get a euphoric effect. Like, yeah, I feel shit. Wow, euphoria, and then it slowly sort of tapers off over a few days. So generally, a person has a healing session, whether it's a talking therapy, bodywork type stuff, energetic type work. They will usually feel better for a while, but then they'll run up against some block and they'll be back in their old state. The main reason why that happens is really about old trauma being activated, old triggers still being there. So even if the person feels better, these triggers are still there and they're unconscious, and if something should activate those triggers, they're pulled back into their state. That's why people spend a lot of time and money on healing, but rarely make permanent progress. So what's really different with RPT is that by de-armoring and going back to the beginning, we're able to heal these trigger points. So not only do we get the person to a better state, but they're able to keep that state for years and years and years because the triggers that will pull them out of it are gone. And again, that is the concept and the content of the level 1 technique. I just know that you're going to love it. If you have any interest in helping other people or improving yourself, then do it the right way. Let me show you these tools which you can integrate into your existing practice to get better results, to get permanent results. Do it the right way. I hope you'll join me on one of our level 1 RPT courses.